Hi, I'm Kriti Shah, and this is my podcast, Have You Thought About? I'm a writer who loves to find out about what passions people are pursuing, especially if they're blending together their skills in unusual ways. In each edition, I'm going to chat with someone I find particularly interesting and who's managed to fit things together in their life or profession that you might not think of as an obvious match. Here I'm speaking to author and science writer David Robson. Now, David, first off, you investigate the connection between the human and the science, that's your thing, and your previous books include The Intelligence Trap and The Expectation Effect. You've got this amazing book out now called The Laws of Connection.
So this is all about the psychology of relationships, not just romantic relationships. No, not at all. It's kind of platonic friendships, our relationships with our colleagues and our family members. It's really examining the psychological barriers that we have that prevent us from connecting with all of these people in a more deep and authentic way. We know from, numerous surveys that lots of people feel lonely. That's probably not a new phenomenon. It probably is because we have something in our psyche that just prevents us from connecting in the way that we could do. And that was what I found through all of this scientific research, is actually so many of us have the potential for the social connection that we crave. And it doesn't take much to change our behaviour to achieve that. So there's so many opportunities to get the social support, the understanding that you require. And we just need a bit more encouragement in reaching out to find that support.
With your writing, though, you tend to bring a little bit of you into it, even though you have that really strong journalistic rigour, especially with the science involved there as well. Do you never feel vulnerable when you're pulling a book like this together?
Yeah, I did feel vulnerable with this book. I felt, I speak about my own shyness in the book because as a teen I was incredibly shy. I had like a pretty bad speech impediment until I was about 16, actually. And so, I had some close friendships at school and I was always grateful for them that they could see past this kind of speech impediment. But it did mean that even after I'd fixed that, I just found conversation incredibly awkward and difficult. Like I hadn't had the kind of practice that I think most kids have with talking to strangers, building rapport, having those kind of casual conversations with people you don't know. And I did feel very vulnerable talking about that in the book because there's still a lot of stigma around shyness, I think. And especially in a professional context, I was worried that people might judge me for that and that I would miss opportunities because people couldn't shake the idea that because I was shy in the past that I might be more confident and outgoing now. And also, you're just worried that people are going to kind of say nasty stuff like, oh, you haven't really got over it at all. Like you're still, you don't want people to start to try to remind you of what you were or to see you through that lens at all. So I was scared of that. But actually, some of the research that I uncovered while researching the laws of connection showed that we tend to be far too pessimistic about people's reactions to our vulnerabilities, and that actually people have a lot more empathy than we recognize, and they often see a lot more courage in our revelations than we expect them to. And so I felt like I had to practice what I preach, and I wanted people to know that I've been through this journey so that they would know that if they were in a similar position, that they would be able to do the same.
But David, with the book, it's a help book, not one of those sort of woohoo help books. There is significant science there, and you've gone through and there are 13 laws. Why was it so important for you to have that sort of engagement with the audience, the potential reader, in the way that you wrote it?
I think like self-help books get a lot of flack, and I think that's because they had been, in the past, they'd been based on anecdote. You had some kind of guru who was just kind of giving their life story and their worldview without any evidence or backing. But this is very much based on really rigorous scientific research. All of it is evidence-based. That's important for me. Like, I don't want to take advice that hasn't been tried and tested. So I wanted to provide that to the reader too. I apply everything that I've learned through the scientific research. So I also kind of do a road test in the real world to check that it is practical to apply. It's a narrative book. Like, it's not just a set of bullet points. So I do try to tell the story of the science. I try to mix that with history and philosophy too. I hope that makes it just more interesting to the casual reader. It helps us to put this science in context when you look at literature or history or personal anecdote. But I also wanted people to have something really practical to take away from it. I wanted to be able to write a book that I could have given to my 16-year-old self and that he would have been able to apply, and that his journey from being this kid who was so shy he could barely go into a shop to buy a newspaper without feeling kind of mortified at the interaction with the cashier, I wanted to write the kind of book that that person would be able to apply, and that would be equally relevant and interesting for someone who's in the position that I am now, who maybe feels a little bit shy and just needs kind of more encouragement to be even more social. So I wanted it to have as wide appeal as possible, and I wanted people to be able to use what I'd learned.
What's your favourite thing that you've learned, that you've really gone out of your way to change your behaviour about connection in the course of researching and writing the book?
Well, something that was transformational for me was the discovery of this phenomenon called the liking gap. That's because in my 20s, say, my social anxiety kind of took the form where I was actually very excited about going to parties and meeting new people, but I would still beat myself up after those meetings. I'd kind of replay all of the awkward moments in the conversation. Anytime I'd said something slightly clumsy, made a faux pas, used the wrong word, they would really stick in my mind. And so even though I'd got a lot better at actually forming the initial spark of a friendship, I felt like I kind of self-sabotaged afterwards. And even if I'd really liked and respected someone, it would lead me to kind of avoid them in the future because I felt so embarrassed about my initial interaction. And I found that this is actually a common phenomenon. When scientists have got two strangers to talk and they've asked each of them to complete questionnaires that ask them, how much did you like this person? How much would you want to be friends with them? How much would you like to spend more time with them? What you find is that each party tends to really like the other person. Like, it's actually easier than we think to form that rapport. But they assume the other person didn't feel the same way. They assume that the other person didn't like them as much as they liked the other person. That's the liking gap. And it seemed to describe this feeling that I'd always had, that maybe the other person was just being polite when we'd had this nice conversation, and that actually they didn't really want to be my friend. And just recognizing that this was a common phenomenon, it helped me to treat myself with more self-compassion, because I realized I wasn't so unusual with feeling this. Through that self-compassion, it just helped me to be more confident to kind of make the move after having had a great conversation with someone, to just be brave enough to say, like, maybe we should meet up for coffee, or, at work, maybe we should collaborate on something. They invited me to a party rather than assuming that they were just being polite and they didn't really want me to go there. I would take up the invitation. In all of these cases, I'd find that my instincts had been wrong. The liking gap was not real, that actually they did like me as much as they seemed to like me. And it was just, just that one piece of information just really cured a lot of my social anxiety.
You spent 3 years doing this particular book.
Yeah.
And yes, it's very well researched, very well sourced, but your brain surely must hurt through all that reading and all that understanding and decoding and then applying, as you say, the science that you've been reading about.
To be honest, that's where the real pleasure of the writing comes from for me, is that challenge. It's like a creative challenge of how do you give shape to all of these pieces of research that aren't always explicitly connected to one another. It's kind of identifying those trends and what the research is showing. And so essentially, when I first started looking into this, I just compiled a huge Word document where I just kept every lead that I discovered, like all of the references, I just kind of put into this document. And what was so satisfying to me was I didn't feel I had to work very hard, actually, to create this kind of narrative. Like, actually, the chapters just fell out very naturally. It's not like I was shoehorning research together that didn't really fit. Like, all this research from multiple different angles, multiple different sources were all pointing in the same direction. That's always a pleasure, where you just feel the story tells itself without me having to do a lot of heavy lifting. I think what did take more kind of brain work was really then kind of trying to distill those lessons in a way that was digestible for people. Just selecting like which pieces of research, because there's so many, like which to bring to the forefront, which to leave kind of in the background, just how to craft each individual chapter so that you're leading the reader through that without them having to make a lot of effort. But again, that's the challenge, but that's also the pleasure of doing it. And I loved like looking into the history and the philosophy too of friendship. That widened my own perspective. Like, I loved reading Michel de Montaigne's essays, for example, because there's so much wisdom contained in that knowledge from 500 or 600 years ago. You often see that these people were writing things that then is being proven by the research. And that's always a pleasure to see, that actually when science is catching up with the arts.
And when it comes to connection, it's not just about building. You're also quite open about letting go. And that's something that emerges within the body of the text too. Was that something that you were expecting for the book to include?
Actually, my partner had always kind of complained at me that he thinks I kind of cling on to friendships for too long, even when the other person hasn't treated me well or treated me with respect. And he kind of felt like I was too much of a people pleaser. I get very sentimental about friendships, and I do find it very hard to cut ties. I haven't really done that much in my life, and I'm not, certainly the book isn't telling us to kind of be brutal with what friendships we carry along with us and what to let go. But I do talk about the science of ambivalent relationships or frenemies, and that's people, very much like the people my partner was frustrated by. And these are the people that can act like they're your best friend one day, and then they can really lash out at you the next, or they can let their jealousy get in the way of their friendship, or sometimes they're just neglectful. They only contact you when they kind of obviously want something, and then are happy to let it go when you need them. The science shows that these ambivalent relationships are often more stressful than the people who are just consistently unpleasant or cold towards us, because they keep us in this state of uncertainty. Like, we don't know if we're going to meet Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, and that makes it a lot more painful when we see them. Even if they're nice, we still feel a bit stressed because we don't know when they're going to turn on us. That did make me think we do have to be more mindful of the relationships that we're keeping, even if you're not going to cut ties with these people, and often it's just not possible. I think it's better to keep them at a distance. But I think what I learned most from this book is that actually one of the reasons I think that I had kept hold of some of those friendships for too long was because I was always really scared of being lonely. I thought, like, if I start letting go of some of my friendships, what if, like, eventually none of them remain? I think that goes back to my childhood and being a teen who was so shy. Like, I just didn't have the confidence that I would keep really solid friendships. And so actually writing this book about all of the ways to build new friendships and maintain them, I think just gave me the confidence to not be so craven, maybe, with the people who were treating me badly, to those frenemies. I haven't actually fallen out with any of them. Like, we're still in touch. I don't mind so much when they're not providing the kind of friendship that I want. I'm happier to kind of let them drift and, maybe just have like limited contact. But when you have a more thriving social network in general, those ambivalent relationships just don't matter so much to you. You just don't feel as stressed by them.
This is the challenge with the book. It is actually quite a light read. I don't think it's heavy going, although when I do look at your references, I'm like, oh my gosh. Bearing that in mind, and clearly science is something that's super important, it underpins everything. Why is it that science can sometimes seem quite exclusive? You have gone out of your way to make your writing, not just the book, but, you've written a hefty canon of work, as accessible as possible.
I mean, I don't think science should be elitist or limited to, only people with a certain education, because a lot of these ideas, they're describing universal human experiences. And so I do think it's part of the responsibility of scientists who are receiving public money, and then science communicators like myself, to try to make it as accessible as possible. I think some people hide behind jargon a little too much. And what I strive for is to be as accurate and precise as possible in the language that I use, but also to make sure that I do so using the kinds of words that people can apply in everyday conversation, so they're not having to learn this kind of lengthy vocabulary list. I think people have had bad experiences of science at school, perhaps, and then I think that can make them a bit wary of reading about science as an adult for pleasure. I'm really trying to avoid that. I hope people who hated science at school can still enjoy my books, and they'll still see the value of the scientific method for understanding things like human psychology, relationships, how to date, how to get on better with their family members. That's really my aim, and I think it all comes down to the language that you use and how you illustrate the points that you're making. That's why I do try to include my own personal experiences to show why it's relevant. I really see that as my big kind of role in my work, is to make the science that's occurring in academia as accessible to people as possible without losing any of the accuracy.
I mentioned that you have 2 other books already out, The Intelligence Trap and The Expectation Effect, and then you've got The Laws of Connection. Why are you attracted to such hefty topics?
I see what you mean. I think it's because I think they are hefty topics, but what I love is that they whatever I'm writing, I want it to connect with people, and I want it to change their understanding of themselves or the world in some way. And I think actually that's, by definition, it has to be quite hefty and profound if it is going to change, like turn your perception upside down. So I think that's why it's always appealed to me. And scientists talk about like research is me search, like we always look for something that's, personally relevant for ourselves. To spend 3 years researching, in my case, or a lifetime in some scientists' cases. And that's why all of them have been grounded in a kind of impersonal experience. There is answering questions that I wanted to know. By doing so, I hope it will help other people who are facing similar dilemmas.
Writing can be quite a lonely process, and you've written this book all about connection. I'm actually interested to know a little bit more about your craft. How do you write? Like, do you have a ritual? Do you sit down? Do you go out and then sit down? Like, what is your actual process to get a book like this and your other works into fruition?
With my first book, The Intelligence Trap, I struggled with the pressure of writing the book after I got my deal. It made me pretty unhappy, actually, the whole process. I just felt like, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. In hindsight, I feel like I wasted a lot of time in the ways that I was researching and writing it. But then I have got into a good routine, I think, in the second and third book. I try to go for a half-hour walk first thing to kind of get a bit of exercise and get the blood flowing to my brain. So I'll do that, work in a cafe nearby in East London for about an hour or two. Then I'll come back, do another hour or two's work, have some lunch, and then me and my partner go for an hour-long walk in the early afternoon. Then I'll come back, I'll work for the rest of the day up until about 5 or 6 o'clock, and then I'll probably go and do an hour's workout as well. So actually combining physical exercise with the brain work has been really important for me to stabilize my mood. I just think having those kind of constructive breaks is really important for the writing process. I don't think I could just be chained to my desk all day and still write productively. I think I'd just be wasting my time on Twitter or Facebook if I did that. So actually, even though I'm taking a lot of time out for exercises, I think it's only replacing one distraction with another healthier distraction. That definitely has just helped me, I feel like I write more efficiently that way. And in terms of like researching and writing, I'd say I try to get a really good idea through the academic research of what the chapter is going to cover. But I try not to over-research before I start writing, because that's what I really learned between the first and the second book, is that actually it's only once you start putting words on the page that you realise exactly what gaps still need to be filled. And then I can do additional research as I'm writing to try to answer those questions or find those anecdotes that I didn't have beforehand. I just over-researched with the first book with each chapter. It's been quite transformative, actually, for me. I feel a lot more relaxed now and more productive.
Have you ever had a blank page moment? Like, what do you do to bypass that hurdle?
I definitely have had that, especially with the first chapters. Not just the first chapter, but actually, I think the first half of the book is always tougher to get started. And then you do hit your stride, and the later chapters often flow more easily. Each book has a different tone, which it takes a few chapters for you to kind of work out, what are you doing here? How is it different from the last book in the style of writing, the approach? And again, I think actually my biggest tip is just to not agonize over that. I think if you can tell that you've done pretty much enough research that you would be able to describe the content of the chapter to a friend, then it's time to write something. And you can edit, you can rewrite afterwards, but it's much better to just have something on the page than nothing at all. I've heard like other writers say they often write their articles or chapters almost like an email to a friend. They try to make it as casual as possible, and then only once that big draft and very rough draft has been done do they start to try to really craft it into something that they can feel proud of. I don't kind of actually write in an email client, but I do take that approach. I kind of feel like anything can go in the first draft. But what I do just want to do is kind of feel my way through the material, and then afterwards I'll think more carefully about structuring again and refining the language, doing the thorough fact check, all of that. But that comes later.
At the moment, a lot of scientists are coming under attack. It's a world where disinformation and misinformation is punted all over the shop. So with you, is there something you have to factor in now as a science writer?
Yes, I mean, I'm always careful to not overstate the facts, and also to express I don't know how to put this. It's like I have, literally fact checked every statement in the book, so I'm sure that it's accurate, and I'm very happy with the way I've phrased it. I am worried sometimes in interviews that is difficult talking casually about something that, I'm worried about overstating things, but I really try hard not to do that. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't done it so far. But yeah, that is a worry for me. I think also what I try to emphasize is that these 13 laws, we need to see them as guidelines, but we need to apply them with sensitivity and flexibility, and always thinking about the other person and their kind of needs and wants. And what I mean by that is that, say, there's a chapter on how to show appreciation for people. And in general, we don't praise people enough. We think a lot of positive things about the people around us, but we just don't actually express it because we assume they already know how great they are, or we think we're going to seem clumsy. So one of the easiest things we can do to create more connection is just to verbalize what we're thinking. I'm not saying that gives you a license to, for men to wolf whistle at women down the street, or for a boss to objectify his assistant, because that's not actually conveying respect. That's just objectifying someone. I was conscious throughout writing the book that people could misread and misinterpret the laws that I'm suggesting, and I've tried to make it very clear that you have to think very careful. Are you actually doing this in the spirit in which it's intended, and are you actually trying to make the other person feel good about themselves? Are you actually trying to create a deep connection? Or are you trying to just manipulate people and use these laws to get what you want? I really advise against that. They shouldn't be used in this kind of Machiavellian way, because friendship or any productive relationship is built on trust and respect for one another. It could work in the short term maybe to try to apply these rules in a very instrumental way to just get what you want, but people are very, very quickly going to realize what you're doing, and that's just going to leave you with a very impoverished social network in the long term.
What are you going to do if people start calling you the friendship guru?
Well, I just don't. I mean, I just really object to the very idea of being of gurus in general. So yeah, I don't want to have this kind of title or anything like that. And actually, I'm quite happy for my personality and myself to kind of take a back seat. What I really want people to do is to engage with the material, to engage with the studies, to understand how they can apply this to their lives. I have no ambition to be a celebrity.
What are you going to do now? Are you already working on book number 4, or is it time to take a break? And in which case, what will you do? Your brain constantly seems to be on the move. So how are you going to settle down?
I mean, I love writing, so I couldn't see a future for myself where I don't write in some form. Even if I won the lottery, won the Euro Millions, and never had to work again, I would still be writing, even if it was only for my own pleasure. And I really feel very lucky that I'm constantly coming up with ideas for new articles, new books. It's part of being immersed in the psychological research. I'm feeling so curious about it, is that I'm always collecting potential ideas for future projects. But I think I do need a period of incubation to kind of mull over these ideas, to work out which ones to pursue and how to pursue them.
And anything fiction, is that also going to be one of the genres that you tap into? Because at the moment everything's been non-fiction and science, but there's a lot around. Well, science fiction is its own genre. So are we going to see a David Robson science fiction speciality one day?
So I mean, I have to confess this, and I don't want to offend a lot of my colleagues or readers, but I just don't really read science fiction, I'm afraid. I know I should do, but I guess just into other genres. I think more, my favourite authors are people like Virginia Woolf, Alice Munro, Natalia Ginzburg, people like that who are writing about everyday life that are very much grounded in other people and the world and society around us. Whether I would write fiction, I do have a few ideas for fiction, actually, but I feel very shy about writing them. So shy that I'm not sure. So I have written short stories that I've never shown anyone. I'm not sure even if I did really devote myself to this, if I'd even have the guts to show my agent what I'd written, which I feel like it goes against some of my lessons from my non-fiction, where I'm telling people to kind of push themselves out of their comfort zone, to to trust that other people, will have more respect for them than they think. All of this, I worry that I'll get to retirement and I'll regret never having really pursued this, because I'm always thinking of fiction ideas. But we'll just have to see if I ever write something that I feel proud enough of that I can actually show it to other people. Yeah, but it's definitely something I think about and care about a lot.
The books that you have, would you ever, or they might not even need it, consider reversioning for a younger audience?
Yeah, I thought about that too, because, especially maybe not the first one, but I think the second one about mindset and how our beliefs can often create these self-fulfilling prophecies. When dealing with things like stress and anxiety, with our fitness, all of these things. I think that's a really important message to be teaching people from a young age. And actually, the scientific research shows that you can give young children picture books that teach them how to change their mindset about willpower, for example. And then it really helps them to show more self-control in the classroom and to show more discipline with their studies. And the same with shyness and, social relationships and the liking gap that I mentioned earlier. There's research showing that develops at about the age of 5 or 6, just as children are developing their theory of mind. Essentially, once they start to recognize that other people might be hiding their feelings and being polite, they start to get really worried that when someone seems to be nice to them, that they don't actually mean what they say. And I kind of find that quite heartbreaking. As I've described, those expectations are often unfounded. We could have more confidence right from a young age that other people will like us as much as we like them. And I'd really love to find some way to communicate that to a younger audience, because if I think about myself as a teen, I think I would have really benefited from that.
And that was the amazing David Robson, science writer and author. Do you have an interdisciplinary life? Because I would love to hear from you, and perhaps we can chat on this podcast that goes with my newsletter, which is called Have You Thought About, and can be found via www.druthishah.com. Please join me next time for a fun conversation with another guest who likes to mix up lots of things in their life. Do listen to past episodes and rate and review the podcast if you've enjoyed it. Thank you to Rian Shah for the music.